All right, and now for our last video of the week, part 6 of building communicative competence. And so now what I want you to do is this is your turn. This will be the last question that you respond to for this week's participation grade. And so what I want you to do is I'm going to show you a couple of scenarios. These are on the Canvas website, so you can access them there. And I want you to choose two of the scenarios. There are multiple ones. This is part of our UDL, is there are going to be multiple examples, and I want you to choose two of them. And then I want you to identify ways I want you to plan for the form, how the student is going to communicate, the content, what the student is going to communicate, the function, why the student is communicating, and then I want you to identify vocabulary tier words that the student is going to use. And let me show you what that scenario would look like. So here's one related to Romeo and Juliet. Ignore the groups. We're going to be working on those when we have our small group time, but I want you to choose two of them. So if you're doing Romeo and Juliet, you have a scenario that Sam is a 10th grade student with cerebral palsy and a severe intellectual disability. She uses a wheelchair and a stander throughout the day. Sam primarily uses eye gaze to communicate. Her teachers use concrete objects and photographs paired with symbols when providing expressive and receptive response options. And so they're reading Romeo and Juliet. She's in high school, obviously. And then her vocabulary are marry, love, and help. And so, again, what I want you to do is and you can look, there are several ones. So you might be like, I don't want to do high school. But I want you to plan for the form the student's going to be communicating, the content the student will be communicating, and identify what the function is, and then look at tier vocabulary words. You've already been provided with the vocabulary words. Just identify what tier they would be in for the student. So we have one on Romeo and Juliet. We have one on Slam. We have one on The Giver, and these are actual texts that are used. And again, most of these are high school. Some of them can be middle school. The Sign of the Beaver. So you want to be president, and I think, is that the last one? Yeah, that's the last one. So again, we want you to think about the reason that I'm using these texts is I want you to think about general curriculum access. How can I make sure that my student has access to the general curriculum while I am also planning for their communication needs and instruction? All right, so when we're promoting that intentional communication, we're getting ready to start wrapping things up. I want you to think that you always assume that a student wants to communicate. They always want to communicate. And so take advantage of natural opportunities to present themselves. You see as someone they love, a student that they are crazy about in the hall, take that as an opportunity to communicate. There's something that they really want that you know they have, but you're not giving it to them yet. Let them communicate for it. You want to target communication for every interaction with the student. We want to constantly be thinking about how the student can communicate, how we can support their communication and expand that communication. You want to be aware of their behavioral changes because remember that behavior is communication. You want to conduct preference assessments. And down at the bottom of this page, there's a QR code and a link to a preference assessment that you might want to use because students often are very willing to communicate for preferred items, for preferred activities, for preferred people. You want to transition to you want to transition to symbol use through pairing. When I'm using objects, to communicate, I'm going to pair it with a picture symbol and a word. When I am at a concrete symbolic level using photographs, I'm going to pair it with a word. And then you want to make sure that you adapt your literacy lessons I gave you a couple of examples of how you can make adaptations for students' response communication level, how they could respond to comprehension questions using different types of symbolic levels. Now, ABA and communication go hand in hand, and you may have heard these terms in your ABA class. So you may have heard the word mands. That's when a student is requesting something. I always think about it as command or demand. That always helped me when I was in school remember what a mand was. They're requesting something. You've probably heard of tax. That's when they're labeling or commenting on something. Interverbals, or when students are involved in communications, engaging in conversation, I mean. And then last we have echoic, and that is vocal imitation. And vocal imitation is extremely important for a lot of our students who we are, working on those initial stages of communicating. I say it, and then I want you to imitate it and say it back. So, one of the things we want you to make sure that you're thinking about when you are teaching communication is something called functional communication training. And I can only give you a brief overview of this. Hopefully, you've covered this in your ABA class. But it's an intervention that's used to teach individuals more appropriate ways to communicate their wants and needs instead of engaging in what are often called those challenging behaviors or ways we don't want students to communicate. And so the goal is to teach a replacement behavior that serves the same function as the communication they're currently engaging in. And so we want them to engage in more functional and appropriate forms of communication. And so what we do again is we teach a replacement behavior that serves as the same function. And so an example would be that if John hits his brother, this is our behavior of concern. This is the inappropriate way, or the way we don't undesirable way of communicating, is that John hits his brother when he's watching YouTube videos. Well, what we want to do is we want to look at what is the function of that behavior. And the function is actually that he's requesting to watch his favorite show. And so, what we want to do is to use functional communication training to teach John to hand his brother a picture that stands for "I want to turn, please." So, what you can see is we had what is might be seen as a challenging behavior, or actually is just not the type and is an undesired way for the student to communicate their wants. And we have looked at the function, and then we taught a more appropriate replacement behavior. And so when we think about functional communication training, there are typically two reasons our students are engaging in challenging behaviors. Again, communication. One of them is that they can't communicate well enough to get what they want or need. I don't know how to communicate it. I don't have the skills, so I'm going to revert to a form of communication that is effective. And that might not be something that we are desiring, that is a desired way to communicate or form of communication. Or they've tried to communicate, they've made an effort to communicate, and it wasn't effective in getting what they need. So if I'm communicating my needs and I'm not getting it, I'm going to go to another form of communication, and sometimes that looks like challenging behaviors. And so, what we want to make sure that we're doing is that we're teaching a replacement behavior. This is a new, appropriate behavior that replaces the problem behavior. So, what we want them to do, for example, is ask for a break instead of screaming. And so, what that might look like is we have a friend here, let's say this is John again, that John has been using screaming. That is his form of communication. This challenging behavior is he's screaming because he wants a break. What we want to do is we want to teach a replacement behavior, and that replacement behavior is going to teach him to use a break card to indicate that he wants a break by handing it to someone. And once he hands it to someone, he receives immediate reinforcement by being allowed to go to the break area and take a break. And so what we then want to teach him is that there are more appropriate ways for you to request a break than screaming. And here's one that's super effective. It's going and getting a break card and handing it to a teacher, to a para, whoever, to indicate you need a break, and then you'll immediately get that break. Once a student has learned one replacement behavior, we want to go ahead and teach them other ones. So, for example, here's a problem wheel. If you want to play with a friend and they don't want to play with you, you can walk away and just let it go. You can go to another activity. You can wait and cool off if it accepts you. So, if it upsets you. So, again, once they learn one replacement behavior, we can teach them several replacement behaviors, because I know that I ask for things in a multitude of ways. So let's look at what the implementation of functional communication training might look like, and this will be the last thing that we cover for the videos. is we're going to look at what's known as a four-term contingency. And so first you have something that's called a setting event. And I think you've already learned about this again in your ABA class, but that's something that happened, for example, possibly in their gen ed class before they came to us, or it happened at home before they came to us. There's something that has happened prior to the moment that has already set them up for something. For example, in this case, the setting event was that reading is hard and the student wants to avoid it. They don't want to. They come into reading class already having this setting event. I'm sure you're all aware of the antecedent behavior and consequence. And so the antecedent here is that the teacher gives a reading task. The behavior that the student engage in is they start to scream and they throw the reading book. Well, then what is the consequence? The teacher picks up the book, tells the student they can't have the book anymore, and this allows the student to escape a hard task. Now think about, we just reinforced that screaming. That's what we just did. With that consequence, we reinforced screaming and throwing the book. Now, if we are that's the function is to escape a hard task. Now, if we're using functional communication training, we are teaching a replacement behavior. And for this portion of functional communication training, we're going to teach the student to use a break card, or they can verbally say, I need a break. And I'm going to teach both of those because sometimes a student can't say it, right? It's easier just to grab that card. And so we want them to do is to use the break card or say, I need a break instead of screaming and throwing things. So the setting event is still the same. The reading remains challenging. The teacher presents the reading task again, but this time the student engages in the replacement behavior, and we teach the student to use the break card when they become overwhelmed. Once they use the break card, we immediately provide that break because we want that reward to be reinforcing, to reinforce the use of that replacement behavior. And now the function is the same. They're still getting a break. They're still getting to avoid work right now, which is counterintuitive, but we're shaping communication. So the next thing we want to do, again, we're shaping it right now, is that the next replacement behaviors, we want to teach the student to ask for help instead of screaming and throwing things. So now we've moved from a break card to asking. Setting event is the same, reading is challenging, antecedent is the same. The teacher presents the reading task, but this time we teach the student to ask for help when they're overwhelmed. Well, guess what? The consequence is that we immediately provide them with help. And that still serves the same function because when I am providing you with help, I am allowing you to at least partially escape what is aversive to you. We want that reward. We want to make sure that we're rewarding that replacement behavior. And then finally, the last replacement behavior we're going to move to is our desired behavior. So we've had replacement behaviors that have moved us towards our desired behavior. And in this case, setting events the same, reading is challenging. Antecedent, the same, teacher presents a reading task. But this time we're going to teach the student to try first before you ask for help. You try first. And so the consequence is that when the student tries first, we then immediately provide reinforcement, immediately provide it because we want to reinforce that replacement behavior. And this is our desired behavior, is that they try first and only ask for help after they have tried. All right, that is it for this week. Just to let you know, there is more content to cover. We only have 1 week for communication, so I want to make sure I get it all in. So we will have a little bit more lecture, but the majority of our time spent together on Monday will be small group instruction, answering questions, and then again, looking at a video on functional communication. All right, have a great one. I'll see you in class.